Welcome to episode 41 of Cyclops is Waiting for Me, an X-Men the Animated Series weekly recap podcast. I'm JC, and I'm a little high on Dayquil right now.
Or the kids call it Dukewill these days. I've been watching Rick and Morty. Anyway, and I'm Rod. Cyclops is Waiting for Me is our weekly recap podcast where we're going back and watching every single episode of the original 1992 X-Men, the animated series, in their original intended script order, building up to the release of X-Men 97 coming to Disney Plus in 2023.
Some quick reminders. We're a recap show about a series that came out 26 years ago. There will be spoilers. If you don't want it spoiled for you, pause this podcast, watch the episode, come back. If you don't do that, I don't care. We will do our best to avoid mentioning anything about future episodes, though, that we have not covered. And just in case it wasn't clear, we have no affiliation or sponsorship from Disney or Disney Plus.
Don't forget to follow us on social media at Cyclops IWFM Pod on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook. And of course, make sure to follow us on all your favorite podcast services. Finally, we record these episodes in batches right now, so if we're reacting to any news about the upcoming series, we'll be a few weeks behind. No new news besides what I tried to spread out last week.
Onto the show. Today, we're going to be talking about Season 4, Episode 5, entitled Xavier Remembers. It aired on April 27th of 1996, currently sits at a 6.9 star IMDb rating. Before we get into the episode, we did a little bit of a comparison. This is in like the bottom 5 episodes from a ranking perspective on IMDb, at least.
I don't recall ever seeing this episode before. If I did, it was so forgettable that I literally just don't have any recollection.
I remembered it because I had remembered seeing more than one Shadow King fight episode, but it didn't leave a very strong impression on me.
Yeah.
So it kicks off with no previously on or anything like that, just goes right into the episode. We're at the mansion, and Xavier is in bed. And what I don't think I ever would have called back then, but he's essentially having like not even a night terror, but a sleep paralysis, because he's aware that he can't move, which I don't think I had ever even heard that term, up until, maybe 10, 15 years ago at this point. But he knows something's going on. There's a flash in the sky, and essentially a storm breaks out above the mansion.
Yeah, at that point, is this in the real world that this is happening? This gets blurred a lot.
It is blurred a lot, especially at the beginning. And I think that's intentional at the beginning, because you see lightning hits the mansion and then starts jumping between the doors of a few people's rooms. Jubilee, Storm, Beast, and Wolverine are in various states of just having woken up and, whatever their nightwear is, essentially. Some people just Beast is just in boxers, essentially. Jubilee has the really long t-shirt and such. And then Cyclops runs out in full gear.
I guess he was on night watch.
Just sleeps in his gear at this point. If Jean is gone, he just sleeps in his gear.
That's what we'll say, because that's him.
Yeah. So they realize that the storm is going on. Storm shouts out to everybody that the elements are out of balance and the world is under siege. And they all kind of go their own ways to investigate this. Wolverine senses something, is kind of in disbelief, and then gets attacked by Sabretooth. We haven't seen Sabretooth in a while.
Yeah.
Probably since the Friends of Humanity episode.
Yeah, we haven't seen him for real. We've probably seen some, flashbacks and stuff, but not him.
Yeah, it's been a minute. But the tip-off is he also has yellow eyes. So we know something is up here. Jubilee, also outside, sees a Sentinel. She gets picked up, and then she blasts it with her powers, which pretty sure Jubilee's powers have not taken out a Sentinel by herself, right?
Yeah, no, not only that, but it bursts the head open.
Right, it bursts a perfect opening, and Xavier's head is inside of it.
Which they never go back to address what the fuck that means. So is one of her worst fears also Xavier is behind the Sentinels or something? Or
well, we'll get into that, but Storm then gets the images around her that she's being closed in on, essentially. And then Scott is outside, and Sinister appears, having grabbed Jean. And Xavier is shouting in his mind that he must save them. They all start sinking into the ground, and of course, Xavier is losing his shit at this point. And he's like, they're gone, they're all gone. And then we actually cut to the real world. So what I think is happening there is it isn't necessarily Jubilee's worst fear. I think it is Xavier projecting into those scenarios.
Yeah, what he thinks is each of their worst fears.
Yeah, something to that extent.
So maybe he feels some sort of shortcoming for her upbringing since he probably brought her into this shit show.
Right, and he knew that her first incidents that she was dealing with were being hunted by the Sentinels. So in what we now know is the real world, Jean and Beast are at the bedside with Xavier, and they mentioned that he had a slight concussion.
Yeah, I rewatched the Sanctuary episodes just for reinforcement, but also to see he didn't get a concussion in this, or they didn't mention it at least. So Does it make you wonder if there was an episode that just got cut out of the show?
There's something, because like maybe that was that episode that got cut for Deal with the Devil or something of that extent. But yeah, it was like, what happened that that this slight concussion was mentioned? And they realized that he is essentially having a nightmare. Mm-hmm. So Cyclops is awake and does what Cyclops does best, yells at Beast. Yeah. And it's like, you're a doctor, fix him. And it's like, doctors can't fix nightmares, bro.
Right.
Also, if the dude had a slight concussion, why did they let him go to bed? Isn't that like the worst thing if somebody has a slight concussion?
Yeah, I get. There's some. So I was wondering if they were implying that he got it while he was asleep somehow because of the trauma from it. But then as the episode is going along, we kind of figure out like he had the concussion and that's why the Shadow King was able to take advantage of it. So yeah, there's so many questions there. I guess like maybe that was the whole point. Xavier didn't tell them.
I don't know. This is a weird episode. Yeah. We're just going to put that out there. So as Cyclops is yelling at Beast, we see Xavier is back in a spot where he knows he's in a dream at this point because he sees his mom and everything has a very obvious blue tint. And he's like, you know, he knows that his mom isn't around anymore and that especially him being an adult, like he shouldn't be able to be here with her kind of thing. And
it looks like it's maybe the orphanage or just a schoolyard or something. It's like a bunch of little kids that would have been his age at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the Institute because he inherited that from his family.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And then there was a really like awkward animation glitch where Xavier's mouth is animated saying one of the lines of his mom.
Yeah.
So that was weird. But
they're really tight. Their family's really tight.
Seriously. But then, you know, he sees the X-Men and they're basically like, no, you did it. We won. Like, you know, that you can finally start to relax. Mm-hmm. And Xavier is having a very hard time believing it, of course.
Because they're all just on the beach together. It's like, wait a minute, these people wouldn't get along.
Yeah, and there's this big cameo shot around, and you see the X-Men main team, obviously. You see some of the members of X Factor, and they had like a graphical thing with it, like an overlay kind of scenario. But also whoever was coloring it in miscolored Quicksilver because he had skin tone with the white lightning bolt across his chest, as opposed to being his aqua color. Yeah, it was weird.
He just went hard. He got that chest tattoo.
Oh, God. I never want to see Pietro with a chest tattoo.
No regrets.
Awful. That's absolutely terrible. But then he starts to ascend. Is that a fair way to say it?
Yeah, like it's like the astral form.
Yeah, where it's over space and it's a white chalk outline style of him.
And then I recognize the other voice in this, but it gets revealed a little bit down.
Right. So back in the real world, his readings start dropping, and then Jean decides to yell at Beast.
Beast, you're a doctor, do something. And Beast is like, fuck it, I'm leaving.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, God, Beast is a doctor dealing with psychics. I can't imagine how frustrating that has got to be for him. He's like, this is not how this works, guys.
Like he's having a nightmare. If anything, the psychic should be doing something.
Right. Where it is encouraged of, oh, Gene, maybe you should dive in there and get him out. Which is the most reasonable solution for a nightmare.
Yeah.
And so she's reaching out to Xavier, and to Rod's point, he recognized the voice. He's being told to ignore Jean's call, and it is the Shadow King.
He remembers the Shadow King in a series of flashbacks where we actually get to see the origin of it, which I wasn't familiar with. I knew that he was tied to Storm somehow.
Right.
We see like the person here in this flashback. So Xavier is flashing back to Cairo where he gets pickpocketed by like a young Storm.
A young version of Storm.
And then runs after her and then uses telepathy to get her to drop the wallet. He picks it up, but then like another psychic hits him up in the Shadow King's voice.
Yeah, he's like, come into the restaurant to your left. It's like, okay. And they have this like interesting conversation because obviously we know Xavier and Magneto have their back and forth in terms of philosophy, where while Magneto takes the perspective of mutants should have dominance, he is not looking for like enslaving humanity. Yeah. But the Shadow King basically is like, you know, humans are stupid and they're meant to be exploited.
Yeah.
So it's not a matter of fairness. It's a matter of like, how do I take over the system? And there's a quick toss out that like this happened 20 years ago at this point. So, you know, Xavier and the Shadow King, you know, they fly into the astral plane in this memory, and there's no other way to describe it other than a kaiju fight.
Yeah, it's my actual note says like they have a kaiju fight on the astral plane.
Yeah,
and that's where Xavier defeated Shadow King and banished him there forever, and that's why like he popped up like years later in what we previous episode
in the Storm episode.
Yeah, in the Storm episode where they battled him. That
Yeah.
makes sense why he was like not in his like physical form, because we're assuming his body is either died or is still in a coma somewhere.
Right.
Somewhere.
Yeah. And he basically, because he saw what the Shadow King thought of humans.
Mm-hmm.
He saw that he was exploiting young mutants by looking at kids like Storm. And the whole thought process is like, he's so cruel, he needs to be stopped. And kind of, essentially says that he was the inspiration for starting the X-Men. It was this confrontation with Shadow King.
Yeah, then we see like the montage of like who would come after him. It's like Apocalypse, Magneto, Sinister,
Right.
This stuff.
He continues to follow Storm, and then you see a bunch of early versions of most of the X-Men, which I thought was a really cool shot, because you had the original 5 in their outfits, Beast not even transformed yet. You had Rogue in her original outfit, pre the leather jacket. You had Gambit, which was basically the same thing, except he didn't have his trench coat.
Yeah.
You did have classic Wolverine, though. You had the whisker outfit.
Nice.
Yeah. So that was cool. And then it cuts to what we referred to in a recent episode. You get the Danger Room replay again.
Yeah.
So they got their share out of that footage. Comes back to the lineup, and they're in their more modern outfits now. At that point, the Shadow King keeps calling for him.
In his dream, Xavier sees the X-Men being destroyed, and the Shadow King trying to like kind of trick him.
Right. He calls out for Jean. And at this point, the Shadow King appears in like his armor. It looks a little bit like the Destroyer in a few ways, except he actually goes as far as like having like a shield and weaponry and stuff like that. Yeah, he actually mentions that there was a blow to Xavier's head that has helped him out, because Xavier has had him trapped there for nearly 20 years. Aside from when he almost got out with Storm with the rift in the astral plane, he's been stuck there because Xavier has been able to concentrate. And we got a little bit of this sometime with the Shi'ar story and the Phoenix story and things of that nature, of like he has let down his mental defenses.
Yeah.
So I don't know if maybe the concussion is something that was just referenced from earlier and Shadow King is only just finding out about it. But yeah, it's...
See, I wish they would have done what, like, obviously years and years and years down the road that Hawkeye did on his show, where he's wearing a hearing aid. He's like, yeah, some stuff's happened. And they flash back to like any number of instances where that would have affected his hearing. It's like they had a flashback. Xavier, he's like, when did he get a concussion? Just flashback to like the several dozen times that they were
where he gets knocked out of his chair and stuff is blowing up by his head and such. Yeah.
In the real world, Beast says that Xavier is still sleeping, and Cyclops is just yelling. I don't know how else to put it. He's just like, he has no other like recourse, and just like, yeah, maybe he'll wake up. He's not even yelling at Xavier. He's just like making a lot of noise.
Jean hears Professor X, and then he wakes up, but his eyes are glowing, and I think that's one of those like indicators to us rather than indicator to them in the room.
Yeah, nobody thinks it's weird.
Yep. And then everybody in their rooms essentially has the IRL attack that Xavier was dreaming about previously. Wolverine wakes up in his room. Sabretooth is attacking him, or at least he thinks so. Jubilee has a Sentinel pop in, reach in through her window to grab her. And Storm, unfortunately, literally has her like own ceiling start to drop on top of her.
Yeah, Storm reverts to child form, and I think she has it like the worst, because she actually lands in like Shadow King's palm.
Yeah.
In this terror.
Yeah,
thing.
she actually sees him.
Yeah. Then back at the war room, Beast says that alarms are coming from the sleeping quarters, but he doesn't actually see any physical things happening.
But there's another life form in the room, and that's when all of a sudden Xavier is floating. That's got to be creepy as shit. It's like possession type stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, and I know you didn't see this, but in reference to the season 4 Stranger Things.
Yep, didn't see it.
When Max gets possessed by Vecna in the graveyard, it's very similar. Like, I'm sure you've seen the meme of her floating in the air and then the Kate Bush song and everything. But like, it was like that pose. Like, he's like floating across the room. He's like, uh-oh, something's wrong.
I literally don't know who Max is.
Okay. She's partially the reason why you've been hearing Kate Bush everywhere. So
well, now I hate Max.
But at the same time, that I guess because Shadow King's like totally taken over Xavier,
all the illusions drop off. Yeah.
And the X-Men wake up from their nightmares.
Yep. And essentially he gives this like little speech of, look, he locked me up for 20 years in a world of unlife, essentially. Like there's no emotion, there's no feeling, I can't sense anything. It just sucks there.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to do this to him.
Yeah, he's like, I've been there for 20 years. Which, side note, seeing Storm as a kid, I guess now we know that she's like early 30s, late 20s.
Yeah, I mean, Well, when she's pickpocketing, she can't be any older than 8 years old.
I was gonna say like 8 or 9.
Yeah.
And stuff. So so she's probably in her late 20s and
Yep.
stuff. So that's interesting, like to kind of like put where everybody is.
Right, and I mean, we got that very similarly with Scott and his
Cyclops.
recent episodes and stuff. But speaking of, at that point, she walks in and she's the one who reveals to everybody, aside from Xavier, who's been having this fight on the astral plane, that it is the Shadow King.
Mm-hmm.
And Shadow King, like, he has a familiarity with her, so he actually calls her Aurora instead of Storm because he knew her when she was a kid. Yeah.
So Jean then says like, well, I know what to do. She doesn't even ask anybody.
She doesn't need to.
Yeah. So she jumps in to like the astral plane, I guess.
Right.
And finds, it's hard to describe. Xavier's like in a hand prison.
It's essentially like a lockup. It's a virtual prison that he's stuck in that the Shadow King is obviously like captured him in. And the two of them kind of like mind meld, where they're using their combined psychic might to try to break him out of it. Mm-hmm. Back in the real world, Wolverine is like, all right, cool, let's stab you.
Yeah.
And it's like, I respect what Wolverine's going for, but you know, Shadow King in Xavier's body says, well, this is the ultimate hostage, because what are you going to do to me?
Yeah.
Are you gonna kill me? Because I'll just hop to another body and then Xavier will be dead.
Yeah, that was one of the few times like Cyclops yelling was kind of
reasonable. Yeah.
He was like, hey, let's try not to kill the guy that's paying for all this stuff.
Yeah, he basically says, put it back in your pants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't need those animanium boners out here.
We get a quick aside back into the astral plane where Xavier and Jean are able to break out of that prison. And when that happens, Shadow King actually shoots into the sky out of Xavier at that point in the real world. And we see this like, you know,
to break a skylight though.
Well, he's incorporeal. Like he can't.
He doesn't know the house rules.
Yeah. He hasn't been in Xavier's body long enough. He's been stuck in the astral plane for years.
Yeah.
He doesn't know you're supposed to break skylight. So we get this battle going back and forth in the astral plane. There's like I-beam shooting. He's then, you know, in an armor and he starts attacking them. Xavier transforms into this like gladiator style form. I remember looking it up when I was doing the edit on the
HeroClix.
On the HeroClix episode. Can't remember what it's called. It was armor that originally Xavier had when he was like under an evil influence. Here it's used as armor for fighting good.
I remember that in another episode, yeah.
Yeah. And then
Jean got her own armor.
Jean was in like future, like cyberpunky armor. Like she had a visor in front of her head. But this is all not colored in. It's all just outline artwork and stuff like that. It's like, it's pretty trippy. And they have a lightsaber battle.
We both have that note. It's like, it's clearly, they're a little bit more on fire than lightsabers are, but it's just a lightsaber battle.
Right. Jean has these like psychic chains that she's able to snag the Shadow King with, and she starts to pull him towards this like whirlwind kind of thing that's like sucking him in. Mm-hmm. And he grabs her on the way down. Xavier won't let her go. And like, I know we're kind of brushing through it because it's a very visual scene at this point. It's action packed, but this is like 4 minutes of the episode is this fight scene. There
was some interesting things too in that fight scene. I remember, I think Xavier cut Shadow King in half, like his astral plane version.
And then he had like 2 lightsabers.
Yeah. And then he was able to like reconstitute pretty quickly. But I just remember thinking like, even though it's not like a bloody violent thing, that's like a really visual thing. That's like a Mortal Kombat fatality, like being split in half.
It was very Kung Lao style. Yep. Xavier won't let Jean go, and he actually sends essentially a psychic burst that goes down into her foot. Yeah. And that's where it connects with the Shadow King's hand. It goes off. That's what makes him release.
Yeah, I couldn't figure out what that was. So my note just says like Xavier hugs Jean, and apparently the power of love knocks Shadow King back into the portal.
Nope. That is 100% psychic power. That is not a love thing. No. But when that happens, the Shadow King falls into this like, psychic cyclone. And in the real world, the storm ends. Everybody's on the lawn. I don't know why they're on the lawn.
I was wondering about that. I guess the little bit of justification maybe is because there's this giant portal opening up above the mansion. They're probably trying to keep an eye on it. And they're like, well, we're not going to leave these like unconscious bodies inside, right? So they just brought them out with them. I don't know.
That was a choice. But then you get kind of like the moral of the episode, which is, reminder about having eternal vigilance. And it's like, maybe this is why Xavier doesn't like put people in prison, because he has to concentrate so hardcore.
Yeah.
To just keep one person in mental prison for 20 years. And the second he let his guard down once, they got out.
I love Wolverine's reaction to this moment. He's like, what the heck just happened? No one answers him. He's just standing in the corner like, we have to remember from everyone else's perspective, They were asleep. They all had collective night terrors. And then they went out to the front lawn and there's a giant portal opened up.
With
over the mansion.
Yeah, with lightning and shit like that. But then he ends it on this like, and I think this is where it falls in the under 7 category of scoring, where it's like, he also gave me a gift, and it's like, he reminded me why I founded the X-Men, and it's like,
Yeah, because besides that, it's like, what really happened here? Xavier had a nightmare and maybe possibly died because his spirit would die, but then the X-Men had nightmares. They woke up.
Yeah, and on the websites we usually reference like fandom and stuff like that, and IMDb trivia, there was really not a lot coming out of this one to reference. In previously on the making of an animated series, Eric Lewald actually refers to this as an unusual episode and talks about how some of the moments that Xavier is having are very much deathbed ruminations as what would somebody be experiencing at the end kind of scenario.
Oh, that's horrible.
Like, well, in the like, you know, you're being welcomed by the family.
Oh, that part.
That
I thought you meant the night terrors at the beginning.
No.
Okay.
You know, having your friends comforting you of like, look, we did it. We won. You can relax and things like that. But it was also showing irredeemable evil in reference to the Shadow King, which to the modern comics, the interesting thing is every single mutant was given one opportunity to go to Krakoa with the mutant nation, including Shadow King.
Oh, wow.
So basically, there is a story about the redemption of the Shadow King. So obviously, you know, 25, 30 years ago almost, like that would never have been in it. But they actually have a story within New Mutants, which was super recent.
I didn't even know that's still going on. But
yeah,
I keep up with comics. Right?
Yeah. I mean, it's the Krakoan era reinvigorated a lot of titles. Like you have New Mutants, you had Excalibur, you have Marauders, you had Hellions, all within like the last 12 to 18 months. So New Mutants just hit their 40th anniversary.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
I didn't mind watching this one, but I probably won't watch it again. This is probably what I thought if I had seen this episode before. That's probably what I thought then. That's probably why I don't remember it.
I mean, that's fair. Yeah, it's fine. It felt like it didn't have the level of stakes for something that could have been way bigger.
Yeah. And the coolest part about seeing the human form or the physical form of Shadow King could have been just as cool of an insert in any other episode as opposed to it being its own thing.
Which also, he is completely different than the comic book version of him. Like, we'll throw that on the Instagram of like the physical difference between who he was in the show versus who he is in modern comics today.
Yeah, because in the show, he was just basically kind of mobster number 5. Like
he was generic.
Yeah, you wouldn't have seen him anywhere else.
All right. Well, I think that's all we got for this one. Yeah. So thank you guys for joining us. If you have any thoughts, make sure to drop them into the comments for either the YouTube upload or official Instagram post of this episode. If you like what you heard, we'd appreciate a rating of the podcast app of your choosing. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or CastBox. We have to do one more episode before I pass out from taking way too much NyQuil during the day.
You're a doctor. Please do something.